Good evening, everyone, and welcome to a new season of Red, White, and Blue. I'm your moderator, Linda Laurel. For those of you who are longtime viewers, you will notice some changes to our show. We've added some elements that we feel improve the discussion and continue to keep Red, White, and Blue on the cutting edge of political talk here in Houston. We begin tonight by discussing which issues and topics could be the most compelling as we close in on the November 2012 election. Which races matter? Which debates can you not afford to miss? Which district has the most to gain or the most to lose? We'd like to set the table for you now, and for that, we've turned to some of the brightest, most connected minds in Houston. We're inviting these special advisors each week to share their perspectives on topics that affect us all here in Houston. Please welcome conservative blogger Reese Murphy. Ms. Murphy?
Hi. I'm basically interested in three things that can be summed up in three numbers. The first one is unemployment, 8% plus. Now, we're pretty fortunate here in Houston and the greater Texas, not being impacted by the unemployment like other parts of the country. But if you have friends and family in other parts of the country, you hear all the time, so-and-so lost his job, so-and-so can't find one after 2 years. I feel it's an important issue. The next issue is somewhere in the neighborhood of 360 plus. That's about how much you're paying for a gallon of gas. You almost have to take a loan out to get your gas. And the last one, $14 trillion. That's how much we're in debt.
Okay, Ms. Murphy, you've set the table for us on that one. Thank you very much. And now, Betancourt tax advisor Paul, the taxman Betancourt.
Thanks, Linda. I think everyone knows that this is going to be an election about the economy. And President Reagan's question of many years ago, are you better off than you were 4 years ago, is desperately trying to be answered by both the Republican conventioneers and the Democrat conventioneers. I think at the end of the day, because of the economic news has been stagnant and there's been a continuing unemployment over President Obama's term, I believe in November the Republicans will carry the day. It's going to be an extremely close vote. And if you were in a battleground state, all you would see is negative ads that go from one end of your television to the other. Stay tuned. They could be coming to Houston by November.
All right. Thank you very much, Paul. Also with us this evening, Interfaith Relations Manager for Interfaith Ministries for Greater Houston, Issa Galloway. Issa?
Thank you. I'd like to look at political truism and say that all politics are local. And I'm encouraging everyone to step away from if they're part of Team Blue or Team Red, and at least as Texans, as Houstonians, look at the issues that directly impact us here and vote your conscience this coming election rather than voting per se what your demographic group or what your emotional, I like to call it the Jersey Shoring of our political consciousness. Instead, I think we should really look at what issues are going to be not part of my identity politics, but what issues are going to really help the society at large and come back to healing as a nation and have a collective conscience.
Well, I think our panel of advisors have given us a great appetizer. Thank you very much for that. And now it is time for the main course. Our guest this evening, communications consultant and former White House speechwriter, Jim McGrath. And also with us, executive editor of the Texas Tribune and editor of Texas Weekly, Ross Ramsey. And beginning their 12th season with Red, White, and Blue, our hosts, Gary Polland and David Jones.
And that means that we know just a little bit less than what you guys know. But let me just kick this off by giving you the biggest softball there is, right? I'm looking at two books right now. One of them is Strom Thurmond's America. The other one is A Nation of Deadbeats. And I submit to you that that is what the Republican Party has given us. Strom Thurmond's America and people who do not pay for what they need in terms of governmental services. A nation of deadbeats.
In other words, we're grossly undertaxed and we're still fighting the Civil War over slavery.
Thank you for that perspective. That's a curious take, Mr. Jones, considering the fact that, 50% of the American populace today don't pay federal income taxes. We keep hearing from the president and our friends on the left side of the political aisle, we want the millionaires, the billionaires, we want these wealthy Americans to pay their fair share. if you look at the tax load carried by the percentage and the bracket in which these people pay their taxes, the wealthy are carrying the load. When you have a government that robs Peter to pay Paul, you can count on the support of Paul all the time. But let's be honest, there is a tremendous disparity, and almost half the country isn't paying taxes right now. So
I really didn't mean to trash your friends. What I was trying to do was identify really where the Republican Party is in the state of Texas, and now, you know, the national platform has been Texanized.
Okay,
Ross, that's all.
Well,
the
essential problem in state government right now, at least in terms of money, is that they promise more than they are willing to pay for. And so you have one party that's promised not to raise the price on anything, another that has promised not to lower products and services, you know, and we're not going to cut programs or anything. And every fight that they've had in Austin for the last 10 years has reduced in some way or another to that essential difference. You know, you're either protecting programs, you're protecting taxpayers, and you're trying to reconcile those differences.
Ross, before we came on the air, we were talking about statistics. Statistics are very important. I noted when I studied statistics, Ted Cruz won the GOP Senate nomination with 7.8% of the 2008 general election vote. 7.8%. That's compared to John McCain winning the primary in Texas in 2008. He got 55.45% of the general election vote.
Right.
Are we creating basically in Texas, in our elections, basically disenfranchisement of the vast majority of voters?
You know, the Rick Perry, Kay Bailey Hutchison primary in 2010 could be decided by as few as about 750,000 voters in a state that hasn't elected a Democrat since 1994. So you've got a state with almost 19 million voting age Texans, and only 750,000 of them are choosing the governor. So the question is, if everybody voted, would you get the same result?
Yes. Would we?
Well, I don't know. But one thing that you do get is if it's reduced to primaries, the parties only have to appeal to the most Republicans and the most Democrats. And,
is that one of the reasons we're having more and more difficulty
I
in
think
Texas
when you throw them
working
into
together?
the bowl, right? When you throw them into the bowl in Austin, and you get back to that essential question of, are we doing programs and services, or are we doing no taxes, or how are we trying to reconcile this? Everybody's dug in by the time they get there. You can't hardly have a conversation.
And Jim McGrath, you know, worked for a president once named Bush.
I did.
I think he might be the last.
41.
Yes, last moderate Republican, and you know, I don't think he was invited.
No, he was a conservative.
I don't think he was invited to the convention either. But let me ask you this:
no, he was invited.
Jim,
He was invited.
My observation is the more safe these seats are that Ross just described, the more extreme is the constituency, and more extreme are the positions taken by the legislator who represents them. Is that a fair statement?
I think when a legislator looks at how they're going to approach a given session, we'll apply the state politics example here. They do look at their constituency. They look at how is this going to play in the district. And obviously, you know, a politician, doesn't matter if they're Republican or Democrat, the first thing they're going to think of, generally speaking, in today's political environment that we have, when we desperately need leadership, the first thing they're going to think about is self-preservation. So the first thing they're thinking about is not creating issues, not giving an opening to a primary challenge. We could talk about the Tea Party in a little bit here, but you know, the competition is something they don't want on their ballot, and so they do think about how the way they vote in the session in Austin plays back home.
I'm asking whether or not there is a more extreme product coming out of the Republican primary as a result of Mr. McGrath's analysis.
Well, another way to say the same thing is that their job is to represent the people who elected them. And if the small group of people who elected them have a particular viewpoint, it's their job to represent them.
Right, so maybe the corollary thought is here. With such a small number of people making these decisions in both parties, to be fair. David wants to say just Republicans, but to be fair, the Democratic primaries
works the same way on both sides.
Not competitive. Right. It's an ideological battle. Those who can prove they're furthest to the left are the ones who win with the Democrats. Isn't that a fair statement?
Sometimes. Yeah.
Okay, so then
it's only sometimes
what about
true with Republicans
all these voters who show up in November? And they're voting in elections where the decisions have already been made. So what is the point of voting in November in Texas?
Well, there are 150 members in the Texas House. 98 of them are running this year without major party opposition, either Republicans or Democrats. The elections were determined in the primaries.
Yeah.
And if you sort of do an analysis on this, you can only, if you squint at it, you can only get to 12 or 13 races of the 150 that are competitive. So the general election voters, we're happy that they turn out and everything, but the decision's already been made.
How about Senate? How many state Senate competitive races?
31 seats, there's one competitive race.
Congressional.
Congress, there's 36 seats, there's 2 competitive races.
And is that the nature of how politics should be? Should we have just basically no competition?
There were a bunch of races that were competitive in the primary.
In the primary, yeah.
And the question is, if you're drawing these redistricting maps so that only a Republican can survive in this district, only a Democrat can survive in this district, then you've basically said we're going to take what we used to decide in the general election and move it back to primaries.
So is that a good or bad thing?
He's a journalist, man.
Well, McGrath might have an opinion.
Well, to the extent that you have a competition in anything, business, politics, you name it, it's a good thing. So if the competition is in the primary, in some of these instances, I'd say the vast majority of these instances, so be it. That's where it will be. I mean, Texas is a red state right now. It wasn't always that way. We're all old enough to remember back when it wasn't. But look, competition is a good thing. And so to the degree that, these districts get drawn the way they do to ensure re-election, are we creating more partisanship out of it? I mean, is it really Republican versus Democrat, or in Texas, in Austin, is it really rural versus urban? I mean, there's a bifurcation there as well.
Right.
Or some nutcases versus some sane people. I mean,
Well, and there's a historic thing going on here too. For a long, long time, 50 or 60 years, all of this happened in the Democratic primary. So we've been deciding elections before November for a long time.
So
redistricting just makes it a little more efficient.
You write about musical chairs in Texas politics quite often in your column, and the biggest chair that didn't move was the Lieutenant Governor of Texas. He's still sitting there.
Right.
Has the Republican Party been redefined by Ted Cruz, and does that not suggest that his mentor, Greg Abbott, is going to be the next governor of Texas?
I don't know that you can go from one to the other. I don't know that Abbott and Cruz would run the same campaigns, the same politics. I think Abbott's probably a little bit more of an establishment character because he's been the Attorney General for a while, because he's represented the state in lawsuits for almost 8 years now. He's kind of the in some ways the face of federalism. Perry's kind of the guy thumping on the podium, but Abbott's the guy actually at the courthouse making those cases against health care, against the EPA, on Voting Rights Act. Whether he's winning or losing is another conversation. But the question on whether Abbott will move up is whether Abbott wants to challenge Rick Perry. Does Rick Perry want to run again? Sometime around the end of January, the beginning of February, Perry will have been governor longer than FDR was president. So Abbott gets to ask the Wendell Willkie question: have you had enough? And it may be that voters come in and say, yeah. It may be that they do the same thing they did when Kay Bailey Hutchison tried the door and said, no, we're pretty happy with Rick. So,
and he's got $12 million in the bank already to ask that question.
Is Abbott, right?
Yeah, that's right.
So you think, you both think Abbott makes a race even if Perry runs, which it sure looks like he will?
I think that's kind of the question right now. If you did a Venn diagram of Greg Abbott's supporters, financial supporters, and Rick Perry's financial supporters, it's the same circle. So I think they're going to have to go to 12 or a couple dozen people and say, which one do you want?
Doesn't Greg Abbott he gets to make the same arguments that Ted Cruz just made, and where he just blasted the Lieutenant Governor of Texas? What is even close? And what did he brag about? How he stood up in the courthouse, his constitutional extremism, if you will. That's what delivered the Republican primary to him. So Greg Abbott, having sued Barack Obama 25 times, you would think would have a little bit of an advantage in whatever primary he chose.
But there's a key difference between General Abbott and Ted Cruz. Greg Abbott's been a part of the Republican establishment in Texas, in Austin, for quite some time. And Ted Cruz technically hasn't. Ted Cruz was very skillful, I thought, the way he positioned himself, really embraced himself, wrapped him in the Tea Party flag. But at the end of the day, I don't think there is a thinking Republican out there that thinks there would be a material difference in the way David Dewhurst or Ted Cruz would vote in the United States Senate. It was all about the triumph of style over substance. It was all about how angry are you? What's your tone? And so I like Ted Cruz. Ted Cruz is a friend. I wish him well. I'm going to be pulling the lever for him in November. But I think that was the key difference in that particular race.
So what does this do? David talked about, and you've talked about it, Ross, the lineup of ambitious, qualified Republicans who would like to have other jobs, and all of a sudden, Perry doesn't want to go anywhere. Dewhurst tried to go somewhere and didn't go anywhere. Abbott, I guess if he has nowhere else to go, decides to run for Attorney General again. There's no jobs to run for.
Yeah, the org chart is stuck. It's been stuck for years. You know, when Kay Bailey Hutchison got out, everybody sort of jumped up and said, I'll run for his job, I'll run for her job. You know, kind of got a flurry. When Rick Perry was running for president, there was kind of a flurry. When David Dewhurst was certain to go to the U.S. Senate, 31 senators started talking to each other on the phone all the time about who was going to be the next lieutenant governor. It's stuck right now, and I think the question that kind of sits politically over the next legislature in the next 18 months is going to be who's running for what, who's moving where, who's just giving up.
I'd like to jump in here for a second, if I could, and ask Ross and Jim what your take is on the I guess the overall health of the Democratic Party in Texas. We just saw the mayor of San Antonio, Julian Castro, deliver the keynote speech at the Democratic National Convention. There have been some rumblings that the Democrats in Texas are not just sort of giving up, but are trying to really kind of gear things up. And I just want to know what your thoughts are on that, if you see anything moving forward there.
Well, I'll jump in here. I think the Democratic Party in the state of Texas isn't necessarily on life support, but there are signs of life. And Julian Castro, I thought he gave a fantastic speech this week at the Democratic Convention in Raleigh. So there is hope for the future, and they need to develop that bench strength, because right now, is there a Rick Perry killer out there? Is there a Greg Abbott slayer out there? Is there somebody credible to mount a challenge to John Cornyn? I don't see it, but Ross, maybe you do.
Yeah, the Democrats have slowly been turning some of the big counties blue. So, you know, Harris County's a toss-up, Dallas County's blue, El Paso County's been blue for a long time, Bexar County's blue, Travis County's blue. Those are all the big counties. But the big suburban counties, the Montgomery counties and the Tarrant counties and the Collin counties, vote big, they have big turnouts, and they vote overwhelmingly Republican. Until the Democrats figure that out and kind of erase the regionality of their support, I think they're going to be stuck. They haven't won a statewide in almost 20 years.
Well, is there an opportunity for the Democratic Party to go after Republicans because of the failure to deal with some of the issues that are lingering out there for Texas, like water, like transportation, some may argue on education? Is there some opening there if Republicans don't come up with some innovative ideas of ways of dealing with these issues?
Yeah, but I think the Republicans were able to hold it off because they had a big sweep in the legislative elections in 2010 and took over the legislature just as they were ready to draw redistricting maps. So they got to institutionalize a big victory in the same way the Democrats did in 1990. So the Republicans can hold the line against that in a way that they might not have been able to if we had the same legislature we had after the 2008 elections.
I hope the Republicans are not complacent on these issues. It was the failure of Republicans in the Congress to not address health care that gave us Barack Obama in 2008. So you kick these issues down the road, don't take responsibility, don't show leadership. That's what creates the issues that eventually, you know, an opponent rises up, grabs onto, and beats you.
Right. To Linda's point, the Democratic Party is largely a party equally divided among Anglos, Hispanics, African Americans. Getting back to Strom Thurmond's America, I guess I have to ask you whether or not
I haven't read
the way back for the
Democrats,
the way back for the Democrats is to identify and make the case that there are people in charge right now in this state who do not want you participating. They do not want you voting. They're doing everything they can to discourage you. That's what photo ID is about. That was what redistricting was about, denying them political power. I mean, if the Democrats can make that argument, that's their base. Are they afraid of making this argument for these people?
They've been making this argument for 20 years, am I right?
Yeah.
They've always said the Republicans are trying to steal your vote. That's ridiculous.
Oh, really?
I just don't think that argument will bear up under closer scrutiny. The idea that they don't want you to vote, the idea that they're going to force you to get an ID to vote. You have to have an ID to go to the movies. You have to have an ID to get your prescription filled, to cash a check. You have to be off the grid, essentially, to not have an ID. But the legislation provides for an ID if you cannot get one. You can vote under temporary basis if you don't have an ID. So I think there's a bunch of canards out there, and I don't think that's an issue that you can grab onto, let the wind fill its sails, and ride that to
Federal
victory.
judges, of course, have disagreed.
You have to get people to want to vote in the first place. So a lot of the places where Democrats would be strong, South Texas, El Paso County, places like that, they don't vote their weight. El Paso County has the same voting age population, give or take, as Collin County. But Collin County, which is a big Republican county, outvotes it about 1.5 to 1. Until they actually sort of stand up and vote, one of the problems that the Democrats have is that the people that that tend to be in their party don't have the same turnout numbers. The Hispanic population is growing very quickly in the state. The Hispanic vote is not growing as quickly. So it's Anglos are a minority in the state, but they're a majority at the ballot box.
So we may need to look to see what happens in Arizona, where they've tried to make it a crime to drive while brown. And maybe if Arizona
I don't
goes,
see that technically in the law.
yeah, it's reasonable suspicion.
It's
If you're
David's
driving,
spin.
you can stop somebody if you have reasonable suspicion that they're not carrying their papers. Well, we all know who they're looking for. All right. So my point is, if Arizona goes Democratic, then the Democrats will have an argument to make about what those voters need to do and hear about in Texas, whether it's from El Paso all the way over here to the...
I don't know if I'd go as Arizona goes, so goes Texas. But.
Yeah, I would, but I think that let me try to help you with your point, if I may, Mr. Jones. Look, there's the saying that demography is destiny. So 20 years down the road, does the Republican Party have a problem in the state of Texas? You better believe it. And hopefully our state leaders and the people that are in the grassroots, the activists, are thinking about that, because it's an issue that we're going to have to confront at some point.
Right.
As well as what you do about these women who are really unhappy with you. You know, with the sonograms and, contraception leads to abortion. Well, the gender grab, as we know, is huge.
Contraception leads to abortion was the sheer attempted manipulating the Aiken comment?
That's what that's Randy Weber, who's your nominee in the 14th Congressional District. That's what he says.
Right. So now we're getting a preview of the Democrats' claim the war on women, which, by the way, David, is really the Democrats' attempt to change the subject, because they don't want to talk about what our panelists actually talked about in terms of all the issues that the president faces. But I wanted to ask a question actually more important than this one. Since Texas is thought of as not a swing state, we don't see many TV ads, is that going to impact who votes in November?
Sure. People are drawn to a fight. Whenever there's a big fight on the ballot, whatever it is, a sheriff in this county or a governor, you get a big turnout. The big turnout in Texas in 2008 was because the Democrats accidentally brought a primary fight here. And it not only jacked up the turnout in the Democratic primary, it jacked up the turnout in the Republican primary in 2008. Just the fact that we were seeing a lot of Obama and a lot of Hillary Clinton ads, that election. I think, if you don't have a fight, you're not going to draw voters.
So, Mr. McGrath, can Romney win, given the financial advantage that he has with the super PACs? As a result of, a little Supreme Court help?
Well, I hope so. Certainly, the president is not without his assets, starting with his incumbency, starting with Air Force One and the Rose Garden and all the other assets that he has at his advantage. Let's not forget the unions. They'll put $200, $300, maybe $400 million into this race as well. So the president's done a very good job of kind of poor-mouthing it, but he's going to have plenty of money to get his message out. He's already spent $500 million attacking Mitt Romney, mostly on a misleading basis. Of course, that charge goes back and forth across the political aisle. But the president has plenty of advantages. I think at the end of the day, though, I think the number one issue facing national voters here in Texas, we don't feel it as much, is the economy. And the president has had 4 years. He had the complete run of Congress in his first 2 years. We forget 80-vote margin in the House, 20-vote margin in the Senate. He could have passed legislation saying Daffy Duck is the new national symbol. He didn't focus on jobs. He didn't focus on getting this economy going. He focused on Obamacare and a failed stimulus. That's not a record that you want to take to the American people.
And that's why they're not talking about it. Isn't that right, Ross?
Well, the Democrats are trying to turn this question, and it's early. We've got 60 days here, so we don't know what the question people are going to be answering when they vote actually is yet. The Republicans want the question apparently to be, are you better off today than you were 4 years ago? The Democrats fumbled the response to that, but their version that's kind of coming out now is that we're on a better track now than we were 4 years ago. 4 years ago, we were, had a higher altitude, but we were plummeting. Now we're at lower altitude, but we're climbing. That's their argument. Whether they make that or not, and which one of those questions, if makes it to November. You won't know until maybe the second week of October.
Yeah.
What's top of mind when people are actually going to vote?
Yes, we're about done. But are the debates going to be important?
Sure.
Absolutely, including the vice presidential debate, probably for the first time in recent memory. I think there'll be real meaty issues out there. I mean, Paul Ryan's a person of substance, so they haven't shied away from the Medicare debate. So I think in addition to some of this light and heat that you get out there, these distractions, you'll have real issues on the table as well.
Well, Ross Ramsey of Texas Weekly and the Texas Tribune, Jim McGrath. Well, you're everything.
All around good guy.
He's 41.
Linda, I don't know. I think we're better off than we were 4 years ago because you're on the team.
Oh, well, thank you, and I'm delighted to be here. Thanks for the scintillating discussion this evening. And to those of you out there, remember that you can catch Red, White, and Blue every Friday at 7:30 p.m. and again on Sundays at 12:30 p.m. And we invite you to visit us online at houstonpbs.org, and please like us on Facebook. Thanks so much for watching. We'll see you next week. Good night.